To the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is expanding to include rather than letting go, actually being a, a conduit for everything. So it should be a fun conversation. Before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding into your lungs, into all your organs, into your bloodstream. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light flowing into every molecule, every electron, every cell, illuminating and energizing and creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So we've spoken about this before. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you joining us this morning. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. We've spoken of this before, but we haven't revisited it for a little while. So we hear a lot about letting go. And as Westerners, we're conditioned to be acquisition oriented rather than letting go of things, right? We're more into accumulating somehow than we are to letting go. So rather than struggle against that notion of letting go, what is an option that is maybe even more effective for us, particularly as Westerners, is to expand to include. So what does that mean? It means to allow ourselves to include, for instance, the parts of ourselves that we may have exiled or that we haven't approved of or that we have denied, to include those as part of ourselves. In other words, to expand our identity, to expand our definition of self, so that we're not limited by the constraints of certain notions, limited notions of who we are. So for example, we get to expand to include our sorrow, our anger, our disappointment, our joy, our love, our generosity, our selfishness, our shame. I might have said that, but we get to be all of it. And as we expand to become all of it, what becomes ever more clear is that we are none of it in particular. So that we are not our anger or our failures. We are not our successes. Excuse me. We're not bounded by those limited definitions. We're not our past, we're not our future, we're not wholly our past or our future or our beliefs or our ideas. And what that allows us to be is more present to this moment and more present to the grand wholeness, unity that we are. And when we allow for that, what we do is we create a space for greater integration, greater potentials, because we are kind of expanding the limits. And ultimately, the more we expand those limits, the more inclusive we are, the more our limited identity dissolves and we become this everything and nothing, because we're no one thing, and we become more this everything. So I think that the notion of expanding to include gets us to the same place ultimately as letting go of all the identities, letting go of all the beliefs, because essentially what we're realizing as we expand to include is that we're not bound by any of those limits. So what's available to us as we become unbounded? It's a very exciting, and some might consider daunting, prospect. We often manufacture our limits to propagate a sense of safety, because or control, because then we can operate under the illusion of certain boundaries, and then we live within those boundaries as if they're truth. And then in living within those boundaries as if they're truth, we then affirm those boundaries and we kind of make them into truth. So we've talked about spells and spell casting or programming, which is kind of the one and the same thing. This notion of spells is not necessarily something that is relegated to magic. It's what we do on an ongoing basis, casting spells on ourselves and others, and being the recipient of spells from ourselves and others. When we're growing up and being taught how to treat ourselves and treat others, when we're taught the beliefs of those who are surrounding us as truth, then we often don't see that conditioning, that programming. And when we start to, we can expand to include that. We can expand to include the parts of ourselves that are avoidant, rather than judging those parts, rather than finding ways to shame ourselves or to belittle ourselves, to exile ourselves from ourselves. I think this notion of self-judgment, where we're evaluating parts of ourselves, we're telling ourselves that we're not good enough or that we did wrong, or we're creating all these assessments of ourselves and others, is very much a function of a society where we're operating from a foundational assumption of inadequacy, like we're not good enough. And so if we can expand to include that part of ourselves that says we're not good enough, that maybe if we can allow that to be as one of the very many, 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 many mirrors of self. And, you know, we're walking kind of in a hall of mirrors all the time, where we're putting out this frequency, thoughts, beliefs, ideas, emotions, and they're being mirrored back to us in all kinds of distortions, or maybe even accurately sometimes. That as we expand to include this notion that we're in this house of mirrors, that can help to free us, rather than pretending that everything's that we're not in a hall of mirrors, to pretend that that we're not in this dynamic feedback kind of loop. I think maybe once we recognize that we're in a hall of mirrors, it allows us maybe to be outside of it as well. And it's kind of like the power that we can access when we're able to call out our fears, name our fears, recognize them, bring them into the light. They lose some of their potency. This notion of exiling parts of ourselves comes from this understanding, or this general agreement, consensus, that we have to prove ourselves, that we're not good enough, that we have to be striving to correct foundational flaws with which we're born, rather than stepping into the perfection of everything. So Rosalind says, denying is duality. If I am not this, it can seem like, how do you separate the song from the music? Ooh, I like that question. How do you separate the song from the music? It's kind of a koan there. I like that. What we're talking about is duality very much, you know, is like that there's good and there's bad. We accept the parts of ourselves that are good, and we punish ourselves for the parts that are bad, rather than to recognize that maybe there's something else going on. And this duality level of perception is actually a profound limitation and oversimplification of the actual state of things. That there's this spectrum of experience, and it's like cutting out the moon so that we can only see the light of the sun. And instead of standing back and looking, hey, there's the whole dynamic to this universe. Or it's like cutting out the night in favor of the day, and not recognizing that all of that is part of the same cycle. That as we come to a place where we can embrace all of it, all of ourselves, all of the pain and suffering in the world, and all of the joy and ecstasy that's available as well. One polarity defines the other. So in fact, they are part of a greater whole. It was really interesting yesterday. There were two sessions that I had yesterday with folks where we were talking about pain. In one situation, it was physical pain. and which started then to be connecting to the pain of the world. Actually, 3 sessions. It's so interesting how these themes sort of percolate through a day. Another was being kind of a pain eater, like a vehicle through which the pain of the world is processed. And the third was acknowledging the pain of the world as just part of this larger symphony of experience, and that it's perhaps something that can be processed and healed by allowing for a higher frequency to be propagating a notion of peace and integrity, meaning integration and connection. And you know, I really appreciate these morning opportunities for our our interaction and conversation, because I often synthesize some experiences through this venue. And as I'm thinking back on the sessions that I did yesterday, there was a lot on so many different levels. There was a lot about processing the pain of living, the pain of living as human beings, and all the conflict and the polarity and the polarization. And it was so interesting to experience the different revelations from these, not 3 now as I'm thinking about it, but 4 different people, through meditating for peace was one of the things that arose in one of the sessions, and being here to raise the frequency of the planet. Another was eating the pain of the world and processing it out, and metabolizing it so that it became well processed. So Rosalind says perhaps the practice is to recalibrate, or attunement. I think attunement, in order to attune, we often need to recalibrate, right? But there's a level of recognition around this pain also as part of an illusion of the polarities, you know, the illusion of our manifest physical lives. So Rosalind says, becoming aware of how big the space is can seem daunting. Boy, oh boy, do I know that, Rosalind. That's really true. I see that with clients as they face the void, as they face an opening, as they face the vast possibility. Often people will just shut down and literally put obstructions in their way at the face of that, where it's just so daunting and overwhelming to be contemplating the vast unknown of that, of this big space, of this endless space, really. So yeah, I have seen clients just kind of exit exit and avoid and go dark, because the vastness of those potentials is just so challenging to our limited notion of self. And I think as we start pushing those boundaries, it takes a tremendous courage. I see this in one of my clients who is just forging forth into this whole new dimensional experience of being. And I say there's such courage there, and their experience, the thing that is allowing them to move forth into this vast unknown, is a rich curiosity, a really vibrant, alive curiosity that they continue to bring to every situation. And it's a curiosity and an unattachment. So there is an expanding to include, oh, wow, look at this, is how I acted here. Not an attachment to the self that, wow, that really looks bad, but a curiosity to expand to include, oh yeah, that's me too, and that's me, and that's me, and wow, what's that looking like, and how's that showing up in the world, and how's that impacting my interactions with others, and wow, all this awareness, expanding the notion of self and expanding the ability to, in that expansion, expand even further beyond those perceived limitations, in the awareness of it, in the curiosity around it. And it's just such a vitalizing dynamic. It's just so profound to, rather than bringing judgment to our actions and ourselves, to bring awareness, curiosity, recognition, and presence, to allow ourselves to be fully present to these different parts of ourselves. It allows us to bring healing and evolution to that in a very natural way, without trying to fix anything, just to be recognizing and then finding that place of choice that opens up new vistas of potential to us. Because when we are everything, we have this vast palette from which to choose of behaviors and responses. And we have this greater ability to find alignment. It may seem ironic to talk about finding alignment when you're everything, but within that everything, there's a more accurate place of center to be able to find. When I'm stilted all on the side, finding center is going to be off balance too. And so as I am able to expand, to include, and as I become bigger and bigger and bigger in my capabilities, my capacities, my expressions, as the range is broader, then there becomes the opportunity to access a more balanced, true center. And it's available with greater ease, I think. So what we're talking about here is a deep, deep, deep sense of acceptance, self-acceptance. And when I'm saying acceptance, I don't mean complacency. I mean acceptance of what's there without resistance. So maybe non-resistance, acknowledgement, recognition, and non-resistance. When we allow that and we couple that with curiosity, the potential is unlimited. It's unlimited. And we have the capability to move beyond the constraints through which, the lens through which we live our lives and most often limit our lives because of how daunting that huge space can be, right? Becoming aware of how big the space is can be daunting, says Rosalind. And I think that's kind of an understatement. And if we can cultivate curiosity and non-attachment, if we can expand to include all of it, as it gets bigger and bigger, we have to open our hands to be able to hold it. And we hold with open hand. It can give us a much greater sense of peace and presence. So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I invite you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. And Rosalind, I have like 1 minute. So Rosalind says, holding breath in between inhale and exhale demonstrates how hard it is to keep one state stationary. Then when the breath happens without holding and evens out, helps to release tension carried in the body, symbology of our boundaries. That's beautiful. It's beautiful. And the in-breath and the out-breath is like, let's breathe in fullness. Let's breathe out fully. Anyway, I'm so graced to have these opportunities to communicate with you, and I'm so grateful to you for that. And so until next time, so much love to you.